Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Ken Russell, and with me is John Ruppel. We're kind of excited about this one because we've done a lot of these shows and webinars, seminars where we talk about the book, Transact, Transform, Transcend, Becoming a Thoughtful Leader, stories from the journey. And we like to talk about some of the vignettes that come from the book. But this was a little different because you kind of have a little notation at the very beginning of this, and it says training leaders. And I'd love to talk about the training aspects because with every product or device or book or system or whatever you have, there's usually some sort of training involved, right? And training is a very serious thing for me. I mean, I started my career as a trainer, and we'll talk a little bit about all that stuff in a moment. But I'm excited to be here because John and I will give you not only information about the book and some of the stories from the book and some of the learning mnemonics and learning tools from the book, but about where we think you might have a training moment, we're calling it, a chance to actually have a moment to take us aside and say, this is why we did what we did, how we did what we did, and how you might, as a trainer, use it with your work with leaders in what you do. So, John?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, there's my bio. So
Yeah.
really quickly, I won't spend too much time on this. I've been in this game for a long, long time. I started my career teaching at a university in North Carolina, quickly became a consultant and then a CIO, Chief Information Officer, various places along the way. Most recently, I've spent the past few years helping the good folks of Virginia, with some of the technology and innovation that they are doing up there. John and I published this book earlier this year, and I'm currently on a book tour with it. So that's me. So nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Ken. And so for myself, my background, I hate to admit, is longer than I care to admit, but I started off in the military, in the Navy, teaching and building curriculum for classified courses and certifications and stuff like that. And then the different companies you see here, there's always been a training component. And where it's come into play really handily is that in the moment, in real time, how do we get leaders and those around us to experience what they needed to experience right there and teach or train them in the moment? And that's pretty much, like I say, through all these different logos that you see, these brand names we all know, there's been an element of training in my background where I've had to come to the plate and we've had to do things for folks, leaders, and even hands-on resources. So with that, what we're going to do is in the training here, you're going to see this badge, we'll call it, this training moment. And that's just an indicator to say, hey, this is a moment that we're giving you a tips or guidance. And we're sort of going outside of the book in the normal context and pointing it in more like the train the trainer, or, helping you guys with training others or teaching others. Ken, any more comments on that, or?
No. I think the label is just there to help people know when we're going to take a slight moment and maybe a tangent to talk a little bit about the training aspects of what we do and how we do it.
Yeah. So now I know we don't have live mics going on with you guys, but what we do want to do is do some interaction with you. And so that means the chat here. I got that on the other screen here. So the question we have to start things start things off, there's three questions we're going to ask you here. This is the first of the three. So what do you find to be the most interesting or challenging regarding the training of leaders in the world today, or today's world? So if you guys want to go ahead and put your responses in there, we'd like to hear what you're having challenges with or what you're seeing out there in your world of training. All right, I gotta scroll down here. Okay. Here we go. Generational work ethic. Yep. Addressing diversity and generalization. Yep. Generalization gaps. Yep. Lack of humility. Leaders communicate styles. Several. Yep. Yep. Skills tend to be permissive. Time to do it. Yeah. Yeah. Respective relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what we're seeing here coming in, capacity especially, bias in any flavor, right? We're seeing a lot of that. One that I like to use is called gravitational pull. we tend to gravitate to what we know, right? So we see a lot of that in the training that we do as well.
Yep, the priority. I was just on a call yesterday, and that was one of the VP of outcomes was her title, and that was her big thing is that, hey, we need to get this prioritized. There's not enough emphasis being put on this, on the training of our leadership.
Oh yeah, I think Marnie, pervasive reaction as what I would probably as a synonym to gravitational pull. So yeah, people, it's not sticky, as we say. They go back to what they know and what they're used to.
All right.
And we talk a little bit about that in the book, folks. Is the idea of a disorienting dilemma is how the brain actually, makes a change, and that's when you actually learn. We'll talk a little bit about training versus teaching a little bit today too, I'm sure, but we'll get there.
Yeah. All
My
right.
audio sounds good, thank you very much, but John's is a little low. John, maybe crank up your microphone a little
Oh,
bit there,
okay. We can do that.
or I could whisper like this, and maybe we'd be better off.
Let's
Sorry.
microphone test, 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 test.
Oh,
Is
that's much better, John. Yeah,
okay. Thank you. Sorry about that.
it gets a little bit hot, so a little bit down.
Oh, a little bit down. Sorry.
Yeah.
I went too much on it. That's the problem we're going with. I don't know if you guys have this, but Teams, anytime I go MS Teams between that and Zoom, is that better?
That's much better. Yeah, I think what you're talking about is the intentional. Some people call it a bug between Teams and Zoom. I think it's intentional though. So what do you call when Microsoft does an intentional something to make it more difficult to transfer between two different systems? But I'll digress. I'm not going to go that route.
All right, all right. So here we got. So this is good. So no, guys, this is really great. Thank you, guys. Yep. So let's dial this in. We're going to focus this in a little bit more because we're going to take you down this path here. So what is the significant change that you guys are seeing, or is there anything stand out since the pandemic? Anything here that's more specific now, just in the last couple of years of leadership since the pandemic's come around. Sorry about that. All right. More virtual work, more burnout. Yeah, okay. Burnout one, yep. Telework, yep. Dysfunctional, yep, yep. Dysfunctional teams. That's a good one. I like the loss of connection.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I think balance is important. I think what we learned from the pandemic is what balance really means. I think we often gave it lip service before the pandemic, but I think we really understand now what it really means to have balance in your life.
Yeah.
And the thing about John, you have John Tomasi, right? This idea of lack of understanding by senior management on how to track work. I think that's a struggle. And I think you're right about the word management there. I think that's definitely a management thing, but it can creep over into leadership because if someone, is more transactional as a leader, they may not understand the need for being a little more aware of what your needs as a team member is.
Yeah, where I'm going to go with that is that actually gets into the whole business language versus hands-on in the trench language, meaning you got your folks running the business up on top, and then you got the folks hands-on doing the work down here. And between the two, they're speaking two different languages, and they can't even communicate. And so how do you translate between the two so that you can hear one another and you can actually understand one another? So
Yeah, absolutely. This is
all
all
right, so
very good. Yeah.
yeah, no, it's good. So where we're going with this, where we want to take you through is that it's this thing called humility. And so here's one of the key factors from the Harvard Business Publishing Corporate Learning Group in a paper they did, it's about leadership training. This 2023 report, it's on leadership training, and it's getting leaders ready for anything is the title. Meaning, how do you get the leaders ready for anything? Because in today's world, that's what they have to be. And one of the key points here was humanizing leadership in this digital era. And so this is what their points were, and what stood out to us was this quote here: employees now expect their managers to care about them personally. They will share what they are emotionally, that they're emotionally struggling. And that, rarely happened before. So, and one of the changes here being more holistic, engage employees appropriately, but leaders still don't know how to do that. And so when we talk about this empathetic leadership and having empathy and all that, what does this really mean though? So when we want to bring humility into the leadership, or taking care of the people, really understanding our people, what does that mean? And so if you guys could put your thoughts in the chart here of where we're going with this, or what does this mean to you about bringing the humility into the leadership and humanizing it and empathy?
Yeah, and while you're doing that, I'll just kind of highlight a couple of things that popped up as I was reading the chat. I think Nancy, you're so right. A lot of times, a lot of the training we do has been pushed to a virtual environment, whether that's right or wrong. And I do think that some things don't translate well. And I love your use of the word trans because we use that quite a bit. We use transact, transform, transcend. And simply the root of the word trans is this guy going across, moving from one thing to another, whatever that is the trans part. So I think that's difficult for anything that you do. And I think accountability, Marnie, is big too. Is that especially if you're 100% virtual, as you were saying, it's difficult to actually translate and be accountable for the things that you could probably handle within 5 or 10 seconds if you were in person. But if you're not, then it's a little more difficult. And when you kind of add on the extra piece of leadership, like John's bringing us into now, what does this mean when you're working with leaders and helping doing training for leaders, particularly about something about as interesting and different as thoughtful leadership? So, John, I'll let you go ahead and read the new comments.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm seeing here is that Heidi talks about getting to know the employees and allowing a safe space to come forward. That's a lot of leaders aren't comfortable with that. Keeping there was another one in here. Listening. Oh, for Kevin, listening and understanding. I'm going to point out listening. We're going to dive into that in more specifics here in a few minutes. So just keep your comment in mind. Those were the two. Yeah, those are the two that popped up there. So where are we going with this, right? And so I don't know if any of you guys had clients or were with leaders in the 2019, but North Carolina CEO conference here that we had in Raleigh at the convention center. But John Chambers was the guest speaker. And what he said is, you have to love your people and genuinely mean it. And what was really fascinating about that conference was that I was working with some senior level leaders here. And about a week prior to this conference, we were trying to figure out how can you, where does love fall into this, and how can you care about your people? What you guys are talking about right here in the comments was exactly what was deja vu of that, or is echoing those conversations we had. And then when Mr. Chambers said that out loud, about if greater than 50% of the CEOs that went on stage, as far as the rest of the speaking conversations and breakout sessions and everything, the rest of the conference, the CEOs would say, I love my people, just like Mr. Chambers said, I love my people and I mean it. And then they gave examples of that. And so that was really powerful. And what was really interesting is that, I don't know if any of you guys have a military background, but if you worked with special forces, special projects, the best of the best out there, folks that are really, where things really happen, right? And you're in those moments. And why I'm bringing that up is because you have these extreme leaders out there. The book Extreme Ownership. I don't know if you guys know that book about extreme ownership, about leaders, but Jocko and his team, the special forces guys, in those environments, those folks that are in those situations, guys and gals, they talk about love. And that's what I think is really a great example here, is that if you take, John Chambers, you take leaders, you take our special forces, you got these different leadership elements out there of extreme, really hard, tough core things going on, but yet they all go back to that loving from their heart. And the reason why that's so important from us, from a thoughtful leader perspective, is when we brought up this acronym, like you're going to see many of these here, candid. This is the metric and the measure of you as a thoughtful leader. Can you, lay your head on the pillow at night, knowing you've absolutely led in a direction that was best for all concerned, leading from love from your heart with a reverence for life? That's the can. And then did you have to apologize? Meaning, did you have to apologize for your behaviors, what you said, more importantly, how you made somebody feel? Did you have to take something back? And if you did, okay, let's learn from that and let's make sure we don't do that again in the future. And so that's brings it to that, the thoughtful leader part is it's based on this very simple basic measurement, and we build from there in this metric.
Oh, absolutely. And just to give you a couple more things on this, I'm going to comment a little bit on the trainer piece of this. So this is more of a trainer's tip kind of thing. And you'll see these little, as I said before, those little badges appear in the top of these, not every slide, but some of the slides. The one that John showed prior, the one with John Chambers, what's interesting about that one was it was John's quote, that John Ruppel's quote that he got from John Chambers directly. You may not find that you have the love of your people and genuinely mean it in any source other than if you were in that room like John was. And I wanted to say, take a moment and say, it's okay. Make these kind of slides your own as you're a trainer. It doesn't have to be someone else's work. It doesn't have to be someone else's quote. It can be your quote, or it can be a quote that you picked up that's in your notebook. It doesn't have to be published anywhere. But if you heard John Chambers, like John heard him say in 2019, then just write it down, just say where you got it. Make sure you have attribution, but make it your own. And I love this slide too, because John brought in the military piece. So when you kind of create these slides, these kind of slides that talk about leadership and what's important, make it your own, and you'll find that they resonate better with your audience.
Yeah. And that's why, with the Candid, so these acronyms, so you're going to start seeing that we're going to get into several of these. There's a method to the madness, we'll call it. And so again, this is the foundation of, and what you're going to see for the next, that we're going to build like a layered cake right now. So we set up this foundation of Candid for thoughtfulness. And then now we're going to lead you through layer upon layer upon layer. And by the end of it, you'll see how the whole leadership system as a thoughtful leadership, being a thoughtful leader, comes together. And then in the context of teaching it, you can see now we're pretending like you guys are our leaders, and we're sort of teaching you in a way, and we're showing you how to do it in a layered approach. So it's very easily to digest and uptake, and people get a piece at a time versus trying to lay it on them all at once.
All right, I love this one. If you had a chance to look at the book, or at least any preview of the book, you'll see that this one kind of pops out. LEAD, lead. What is thoughtful leadership? So the most important thing I can kind of convey at this point, and John and I have a couple of things for you after this slide, is a thoughtful leader listens, not just with their ears, but with their heart, their experiences, what we call an informed gut. Some folks call that intuition, right? But that's what it is, mostly listening, taking the time to listen. And they also routinely empathize. I mean, John mentioned the empathize part of empathy earlier in our conversation. Taking the time to lean in, right, and share experiences, stories, if you will. And we call them vignettes in the book, but stories by any other word. Pay attention to all the epidata swirling around. And I don't mean metadata. If you got any technical folks out there, epidata is a little bit different. Epidata is the everything around you that is impacting your life and what you do. So it's the data around you, above you, below you, whatever it is, life circling about you is epidata. And being aware of what's going on within your organization or your life or your situation. This idea of being a sponge is pretty important. There was a famous author once who said, we should all endeavor to become one on whom nothing is lost. Extra points if you know who said that in the comments. But we should all endeavor to become one on whom nothing is lost. And this idea of absorbing kind of takes that in. We should learn as much as we can about as much as we can, particularly as trainers, because when you're trying to convey a point or a bit of fact or a learning moment, being able to connect with someone on myriad levels is pretty valuable. So whether I'm talking about a Holley 4-barrel carburetor, or I'm talking about how to make the meringue on the pie just exactly right, it'd be helpful if I knew something about something, right? This idea of learning as much as you can about as much as you can is absorbing. And it's a hallmark of leadership, right? Having the skills, the proficiency, and the fortitude to understand the whole environment. And then the last one, this idea of discerning, knowing when to make a change or when to make a thought known or that sort of thing. This idea of transformation has been very popular the past few years, and we'll talk a bit about that. But transformation is a very specific thing. It's this 45-degree or 90-degree turn it's a big, serious change. Discerning is a little bit different. It's a little bit more nuanced. This is idea of maybe a 1 or 2, maybe a 3-degree vector change. Like, okay, we're doing okay, but if we just make a slight change here, then 100 miles out, we're a little farther away, right? But we have time to make those adjustments, you see. So discerning is a little bit different. So John, let's do the reveal here and talk about what that's all about.
Okay.
All right, so I see Aaron's hand there, but give me a moment to just kind of walk through this. John, you want to walk through what we have buried in our thing? We have listens, empathizes, absorbing, discerning. So that spells Lead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where lead comes from. So
And
Aaron, what?
how do we handle Aaron's question, by the way, skills development folks? Do we answer questions now, or do we hold them to the end, or what do you want to do?
It's up to you. You can take them as they come if you'd like.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
What's up,
yeah.
Aaron?
Aaron, go and put it in the chat.
Oh, all right, no worries. Thank you, Aaron.
All right.
I love it. I love it.
We're off the hook, man. Camera off the hook. All right.
That's fine.
So, all right. So layer one was, you can see how we did candid, and now we layered in lead, and you notice there on lead, E was empathize, right? So that we've led you into, started with that, what the report was from the Harvard Business Journal publishing group. And then now you have lead, which is empathize. And now we're going to get into the types of the 3 leadership styles. So we're adding another layer here, and we'll start off with transactional leader. So how to be thoughtful. So for transactional, the thought here is you're going to relate being thoughtful to being transactional. How does that correlate? So from a teaching perspective and teaching this. And so that's where what we try and do is when we work with our leaders, we say, okay, from the context of being transactional or in the mode of transactional, how can you be thoughtful as you set direction, as you motivate and inspire, as you are always aware, the situational awareness. And so that's pretty much the conversations, the exercises, the information we give them, going back to how we use the data model and your evolution of using data as it applies to leadership. This is what we do when it comes to the transactional area of trying to be thoughtful.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great way to start it. We're going to take a moment here to just kind of slow down on the 3 basic elements that we highlight in the book. Basically, most leaders come into leadership positions as transactional leaders. Quid pro quo. You do something, you get something. I assign something, you do something. That sort of stuff. And I think that's kind of normal. That it never goes away. If you have an operating organization or a business, yes, of course it's transactional. The risk becomes where if you kind of stay in that mode and you kind of exist in the transactional mode all the time or most of the time. So the next few modalities we're going to share are the transformational and the transcendent. But you're seeing as we kind of pop on these slides here, the key elements of what makes someone more transactional versus what makes someone more transformational, that sort of thing. So John, I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah. So for the transforming, then again, when you're going through this, it's try to get your students, the leaders out there, try and get them to put themselves, okay, in this mode. So now we're in the transformational mode. How is that? And Ken talked about the transactional being a transaction. Transformational is more, hey, we're going to set this vision out there. We're going to set this distant goal, or we're going to set this objective and goals, however whatever construct you're using, your organization uses to set its, goals and objectives, however you want to do that. And then how do you make that reality, right? How do you support? How do you empower your folks? As a transforming leader, you're going to be empowering folks. And so how do you do that thoughtfully? How do you do that morally and ethically? So again, get your leaders to think about it from the terms of working from the heart, going back to our love slide, going back from working with love is how can you be a transformational leader and how can you transform when you're working, when you're caring from your heart? And that to me is very interesting because true story, I'm in a classroom, I'm in NC State teaching a transformational leadership class, and I had a senior leader, very senior leader in the class. And after the class, everybody left, and the person was just heads down and just like frozen. And I was thinking to myself, okay, oh, what's going on here? So I walked up as gently as I could, walked up and said, hey, what's going on? Everything okay? And the person just was like, yeah. And then they go, you just made me realize something. I've had decades of a career and I've been that person you were talking about. And it hit that person all the way. You could feel it. And it was very emotional. I'm getting a little bit emotional talking about it, just remembering the feeling of her emotions in that moment. And she goes, how can I do this? Meaning she was asking herself, just putting it out there, how can I go from being transactional into being transformational? And at that point, I just said, hey, it's all about looking inside yourself. I'm here to help you. Whatever I can do to help, I'm there for you. And you can do this. Anybody can do this. It's just got to look inside. And so that to me was one of the most impactful experiences I had in teaching a leader, a very senior leader, very powerful leader, and having them come to that epiphany just by self-analyzing and reflecting on themselves about being transactional versus transforming, and then tying it into their heart and how they made how other people feel. Yeah.
That's great, John. I'll kind of help you transition to the next one because I can sense you wanting to talk about transcendent. But before you go there, let's stay on transforming for just a second because I want to say a couple of things to the trainers out there.
Yeah.
We talk about transforming, and as I said before, this idea of transformations are, I'm not going this way, I'm going that way. I mean, it's a pretty robust kind of, it's not a minor change. I'm not coming back to this way anymore. I'm going to stay that way. And a good example of that would be this idea of amplifying direction or collisions to enable discovery, right? So this idea that could I create something to intentionally kind of disrupt what has been happening? We talked about, being psychologically safe. We talked about listening, which we'll talk about some more. And you mentioned the idea of resources. So I'm gonna give you one example, and then we'll talk about that as a transformational element, and then we'll talk about the transcendent piece in a moment. So one example is in our world of resources, one of the most popular resources for all organizations, whether you're a technology organization or not, is the database administrator, right? A DBA. Think about that for a moment and think about being in 2024. Is it enough to be an administrator of data anymore? And I think the answer is no, right? Because before we would just simply have our database administrators create reports or do lookup tables or whatever task they had to do. It was very task driven, transactionally driven, right? But now we've asked them to do more with data in our organizations. We've asked them for insight. We've asked them for wisdom. We've asked them for what do you think about these data, that sort of thing. So you see how it's changed? That's a transformational change. But the word itself, DBA, hasn't changed. The role hasn't changed. So my challenge to you folks is maybe what we do is we keep the A. They can still be a DBA, but maybe what they're now is they're a database amplifier. You see the difference? So the idea of just kind of changing a little bit, transforming what you already have is where you can actually make a big difference as a leader. And as a trainer, teaching leaders this, trying to find those examples in the organization where you can have these impactful moments.
Thank you, Ken. I'm always amazed that you come up with these moments, these golden nuggets. Never cease to amaze. So getting to the transcendent. So in the book, then what separates a transcendent leader from the others is the fact that you're going above the fray. And this term, the fray, means the noise, the politics, the ideology, especially this being our political season, things are pretty amplified right now. So, but how do you get above all this so you can be that calm, cool, collect, in your head, that clear, making clear decisions above all that stuff? And the way you get above the fray is the ability to discern. You calming yourself down so you can make those subtle nuance changes and see with clarity that, okay, I only have to tweak on this or nudge this a little bit or say these few certain words in a certain way. That's all I have to do. And that will direct and that will influence things to go in the direction that we all need it to go. And so that to me is really important because in order to get there, what that means is you have to calm yourself. And it's not only just in your head, but even inside your heart too. And, here, when you're leading, you have to have a calmness throughout yourself. And that's something really a lot of people, like in your comments thinking about before, you know, to some of the comments that you guys made in the opening questions here, that's exactly getting to the key of this, is that it goes back to having the person self-reflect internally inside themselves as a leader and see at that moment in time, where am I coming from as that leader? And can I get myself into a space, a clear head space, a clear heart space, where I can go ahead and make those decisions and feel, not just hear and get the sense around me, but or the data points around me, but actually get a sense of the feelings of what's going around in the environment around you, the epidata. So you're calm enough to collect that information and clearly be able to discern. Anything else you want to add on that, Ken?
I do. So one of my favorite lines from the book, we start each chapter with a quote, and like most people do, most authors will have some sort of meaningful quote from some famous person that they may or may not know. But the point is, this particular one, page I think it was page 99, if you've got the book, and it's from Neil Sedaka and Howard Greenfield, who was Neil Sedaka's lyricist. So the song is "Love Will Keep Us Together." You probably all know it if you're of a certain age. Captain and Tennille, that sort of thing. There's a line in there that says, "Hear with your heart, and you won't hear a sound." And I love that line because it talks about you're not really hearing with your ears. You're kind of finding the moment to shut out the noise, become aware of your organization, as we say there, the organization value, or tuning the resources, and then taking that moment to hear with your heart and not just with your ears. So there you go. There's a good transcendent moment for you. John, I think we're ready for the next one.
Yeah, actually, I'm looking at the comments. I want to go on. Kevin just put something in here. I think, Kevin, you said here, but that requires preparation. And so you just don't show up and start breathing calmly. Right. So one of the things that we teach here is what cues, what can you put in your head? Like Dr. Ken just shared with us here this song, right? Is there a song? Is there an image? Is there a memory? Is there something that you as a leader can go to trigger yourself to say, okay, this will get me to calm, or this will get me recentered, or get me focused off of what's going on in the fray and get me above the fray quickly. And so working with leaders to develop that, yes, that take some preparation, but that's one of the things you can do in the teaching of being transcendent is, what are some of these shortcuts you can create for yourself as the leader to get you in that calm space, and have those ready ahead of time. And then when you notice, like, okay, hey, I'm getting a little bit nervous here, or hey, I'm getting too emotionally involved and too passionate right now, I got to tone it down. I get to the clarity. Boom, I'll think of this. And so for me, I'll give you an example. For me, there's a song by Shinedown, and it talks about love and life. And so when you play that, when I think about that song, it automatically brings me to calm and okay. And so again, you're going to have these different things you can do, or images you can use.
Yeah, I think reach into yourself on these things, because I think we've all had those things, and we may not have them immediately accessible. But I bet you, based on even what Kevin said about start breathing calmly, think about that. When do you actually do that? One example I can give you is when you go to the doctor's office and they put that cuff on you. The first 5 minutes you walk into the room, they slap you with the cuff. They try to take your pulse. They try to get your all that stuff they do to you, and you just walked in from the parking lot. If they would just give you a couple of minutes to chill, they'd have better readings, more accurate readings, you see. And just in the same way, I think John is trying to allude to that there are things that we can do as trainers to kind of prepare our audience, or our the folks, our participants, to be ready to absorb. Because you're right, we just can't just throw this stuff out there. You have to kind of be in that mode, or that zone, if you want to call it that. So modality is important. And I think it's important to have a couple of things in your hip pocket to help you as a trainer, but also things that you can help convey to leaders to help them kind of get in that mode as well.
And speaking of modality, that's a great segue into our next slide here, which is, so this, what we're trying to, we have some questions here, you can ask. Leaders, need training too. And then we have the 3 questions there. And really the emphasis, or the impetus of this one is how do you switch between the modalities? Meaning, when you're working with your leaders, the goal here is we've got the different layers, right? Okay, leading from love with the heart. Okay, we start there. We talk about there are 3 different modalities. Then we have the words, or, we're going to get into some more here, but you're going to have the ways you can think about the leadership. And now it's going to be the switching mechanisms. How do you switch between the different gears? And that's really important, because today's leadership is all about, when leaders, as a leader, there's so much demand on you in so many different areas, in so many different situations, that to be that situational leader, you're going to have to switch gears. And so part of the exercises, and we're even preparing this for an exercise next week, is we're going to do an exercise with leaders to train them on switch. What do they need? Think ahead of time in different types of situations. What are you going to need to personally switch gears? And then what do you need the leadership above you? And what do you need your organization to help you as that leader to make it easier for your teams to switch gears, or, hit them, so that the goal here at the end is to make sure that you as a leader are providing the right leadership where and when the organization needs it of you.
Yeah, I think a thoughtful leader is aware, right? And you as a trainer can help them become more aware. We talked about gravitational pull. We talked about the resource. We talked about accountability, all those things. But I'm kind of going to hover a moment on the leader of requirement. And just speaking as someone who spent a lot of time in the cabinet room or the C-suite, you're often asked to do far more than you are slated to do, or your role description says you do. When you're a leader, you just you wear many hats, and I think we do that in any organization and anywhere in our lives. We all operate in these different modalities. We see 3 modes here: transactional, transforming, transcendent. But I'm in dad mode half my life, right? Or I'm in work mode, or whatever mode I'm in. Sometimes I'm in, I think John mentioned the other day, I'm, washing dishes mode or something. I don't know, whatever mode I exist in. But this idea of what do I need to be at that moment? What role do I need to play? One quick example is that we had a situation where someone was embezzling in our organization, and that was pretty serious. And we all had to kind of hunker down and become the role that he vacated. And I think that was a very interesting kind of challenge for all of us in the cabinet, is to become the leader of requirement that the organization needs us to be. And that leads to the next thing, the speed of transition. So this idea of not pushing against that gravity. We talk about, we want to be this role that we were hired to do, that sort of stuff. But you know what? If I need to be transforming in this moment, but transactional because I need to go ahead and get a bunch of invoices out because someone else is not there, I need to have the ability to move between them gracefully and with grace, if that makes sense, and with some sort of degree of confidence, right? And I think you as trainers, it really just what we've discovered with this book, and we're really excited about the response we've gotten, is that we get different stories from people all over now the world. It's amazing how it's kind of grown, where people have their stories of where leadership has changed or impacted their life in some sort of way. And that helps people create their own stories, so they can actually use them as training examples for when they need to talk about the different leadership modalities we talk about here.
And so just to give you guys some ideas on, what can you do, right, in terms of topical or subject matter based type training, or, if you want to teach different insights for different situations. So we have some from and tos, comparisons here. And so these are, you can base some exercises or ask questions or lead them through the leaders on how would they handle going from careening to strategic, right? How do they go from the from state to the to state? How would they do that thoughtfully? And so these are just some, again, just want to give you guys a couple ideas here of how to, some ideas to use.
Yeah, and I'll linger on the top one there for a second. This idea of vendors versus partners. Think about how that one word changes everything. And I know everybody has vendor management systems and that sort of thing, but if you take a moment to consider someone not as a vendor, but as a partner, it changes the whole perspective of how you communicate with someone. And in a similar sense, that last one, chaos, ambiguity, and fear, I call those the cousins, by the way, because you don't usually see them without the other. It's rare that you have chaos without ambiguity and fear. It's rare that you have fear without chaos and ambiguity. They're always there, and they're always kind of lingering about. But if you figure out, and recognize how role changes and fatigue, I call it change fatigue, plays in your rapidly changing environment, it's easier to kind of keep those cousins busy doing something else or out of the room entirely. But the point is, look at these as examples of what you kind of usually see in organizations to what you can actually help transform and transcend them to be.
And if that wasn't enough for you, we have some more. And this is, what are we up against, right? So from a leader's perspective, this is what, when we poll a bunch of leaders and as we've talked to leaders, this seems to be the group that's, when Ken does his mind mapping with the leaders, these are the top ones that have come to mind of recent, within the last year or so. And to me, it's, there's the discern piece, right? Discern is there. And again, that's getting you above the fray.
I think we're seeing a lot more of the being human stuff too, John, since the pandemic. I think we're starting to see, because someone mentioned balance earlier and just being aware of what's going on in the work-life balance, but being human is much more accepted now than it ever used to be.
Yeah. And one thing I'll just say, yesterday, when I was working with our client yesterday, the espouse versus the real, that came up when we were talking about Gen AI, right? There's some leaders that are trying to figure out how are they going to lead their Gen AI initiatives. And one of the things we came up was this whole conversation for data. What data are they going to use to get to tie into their models? And what's the process? And how do they go dig out their data from these processes? And this is where espouse versus the real came in. So it was very interesting in that conversation. I forgot to tell you about that one, but yeah, that popped up yesterday. It was a lot of fun. I was thinking about you while we were having that conversation.
The constant battle of what we say we're going to do versus what we actually do. Yeah, that's what that one's all about. So thank you. The other one on there that I'm going to kind of linger on too is this, because we are talking about trainers, and I wanted to kind of give you a trainer's tip on this one. The install, implement, integrate one. I call that the 3 I's, because particularly as trainers, we're trying to kind of convey some sort of information to a body of people or an organization, right? So if you kind of take that next step from training to teaching, how do you teach someone something or impart knowledge and have them change their behavior? I think where we fail a lot of times is that just like we install software, we install stuff and sometimes we walk away from it and then we just say, it's installed, shouldn't it work? Well, there you go, you missed something. Only when you implement is it a little bit better, right? You implement something and that, okay, it's implemented, that's great. I think most organizations can get by with that and be just totally okay. But where people wonder, well, we installed, we implemented, why did it fail still? And I think people forget about the 3rd I, which is integrate, and making sure that it actually gets integrated into the organization. And I think a lot of training is that way. And unfortunately, a lot of large organizations, they'll pay for the training, but they won't pay for what was the other person that was earlier in the comment saying this idea of making people accountable, making people have that transfer of knowledge. Doesn't really occur if you just sit in training class. You have to go through these 3 steps. You have to install it, you have to implement it, you have to integrate it, whatever that means for your organization. And sometimes that's a little bit of a bigger ask for senior executives. They think just sending someone to a training class is the panacea. It's not. It's the beginning.
Yeah. And that's a great segue, another great segue into the final layer, we'll call it. So again, getting into how do we train people to be thoughtfully. So we've got these acronyms. Okay, we're starting with lead. We've already talked about lead. And if you notice, the first, the L stands for listen. Well, that leads us into listen, another acronym, right? And so what does listen stand for?
Yeah, embedded acronyms. I'm telling you, this is nested acronyms.
Yeah. And there's a method, and I think you guys are seeing the method of madness here is, and there's a summary slide here in the end, it'll pull it all together for you. But if you notice here, we're taking the leaders, when we're walking through the leaders, so like you guys, we're walking you through this story and we're layering upon layering upon layering. And at the end here, we're going to pull it all together that ties it into how to be that thoughtful leader, which is this whole foundation we've been building. this is part of the foundation building. We're still foundation building here, even at this stage where, you know, just a few minutes left to go. We still putting in the final layers and chinks of the foundation in place to actually have that leader then go, oh, okay, now I get it, or have the tool that they can take away to say, okay, now I can go experience how I be that thoughtful leader. And the one I'll point out here, two things I'll point out and listen is what I found is when being a consumer of the book now we wrote the book, but being a consumer, I can't believe how much LIS, the listen, interpret, shape, is basically, when I think about my leadership now from a thoughtful way, how much time I spend on learn, interpret, shape. A majority of my time now is spent doing just that. And I didn't realize that prior to being a consumer of the book.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think a lot of us are that way. I think just because of the pressures we have working in organizations, the pressure to go ahead and make the change, make the transformation, whatever it is so great that we forget that before you have the T there for transform, you have learn, interpret, shape. You've got to take that time to listen, learn, interpret, shape what you do before you make some grand change or transformation in your organization. But if you do that, John, you get to the fun stuff, right? Those last two are pretty fun. I'll do the evolve if you do the next one. So evolve is what happens when you actually transform, because some people think that transformation is the end game. No, 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 no. It continues on. You evolve. Evolution always occurs. A thoughtful leader evolves. So John, the last one?
Yeah, last one's nurture. So the reason why we highlighted this was it goes back to how to be thoughtful, right? And so that's why I really picked up on the nurture is you're empowering, you're providing, you're supporting, you're nurturing. Those are caring. That's a caring action. That's a caring psychology. That's a caring supportive, the feeling that you're giving to somebody. And so to me, to me, from teaching a thoughtful leader when they get to listen and now they nurture, that to me is a subtle but a very impactful way when the leader is actually finding themselves doing this and being nurturing. It's almost like a milestone for them, a milestone moment to being of how to measure yourself or gauge yourself as a thoughtful leader. So that's one thing we share with our leaders is that once you get used to doing this stuff, then take a back look at this, and then how do all of these acronyms or how do each one of these elements then contribute to being thoughtful? And then this, again, that's why we highlighted the end on listen, because I think it's important. It's a subtle but important milestone for those that want to gauge themselves on thoughtfulness.
Yeah, and as a trainer or as a leader, it's where you want to be. You want to be at the point where you're nurturing, not battling with somebody. You want to kind of help guide them, stay connected and engage, right?
Yeah. And now we're on to our last one here for today is dent. So
one of my favorites.
yeah. So little behind the scenes, our illustrator, who's a lovely 16-year-old high school student, made this. And so dent, but it looks more like the graphic looks more like a smash. So Ken here and our illustrator Ella are going back and forth. Is this a smash or a dent? So in the future, you may see this be a little different. And I don't know if you guys want to vote on it or contribute, but the last audience we
okay.
did.
Let's do that because this doesn't have a little badge on it. So this wasn't supposed to be a training moment, but since John brought it out, yeah, right. This looks like a smash to me. So let me know, what do you got? This look like a dent graphic or a smash graphic? I'm just asking. I'm just asking.
You guys put I'll take it back to Ella and say, Ella, this is the second audience we did this with. And unfortunately or fortunately, girl, you got some work to do.
Talk about situational bias though.
Oh, look at this. Oh man. Smash it. All right.
Okay. Destroy. I like that, Samuel. That's great.
All right.
Oh, I like Chris Yeager's one. That's great. Thanks. That's good. Yeah. Dents of consequence. Very nice.
All right.
Let's go to the acronym. I know we're running out of time. Let's go to the acronym.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So what I like about Dent is that Dent. I mean, so this came to me because I was paying attention to Steve Jobs, right? And he was talking about we should make a dent in the universe, or otherwise, why are we here? Or some paraphrasing at that point. But he had a really great point. So disorient D is important because the brain is ready to learn when you're disoriented or shaken to the core. Really, it doesn't have to be dangerous. It doesn't have to be harmful, but it does have to make you say, "Huh." I wonder, or maybe there's what I've always been thinking about is not the way it really should be. So the idea of disorient is key to making that transition to being a thoughtful leader. You want to do extend or navigate or the other ones, John, or you want to go and run through them?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so extend, and this is important too, is that when you create new ideas or a new thought or a new process or whatever else, it's important to know, am I extending something that's already out there? Am I just kind of refining it? Or is it in fact brand new? Is it novel? And I think the important thing to know there is just to know the difference, because you don't want to spin your wheels on creating something that you think is new, but it's already out there. So making a dent, it's important to know where what you're doing is extending or revisiting, or is it something novel? Because all of that helps you navigate a pathway. And I think it's important to have a path to go forward. And that's what's really cool about this acronym is that, does it help you understand something? Does this idea or new process help you understand something, see the opportunity better, create a path to get there? Because if you have those three, then that T word comes back, because then you can really transform and help you make that, change that directional path. Instead of going this way, you go that way. So that dent helps you kind of move along. So we can go into whole, Newton's theory of whatever, but we're not going to do that today. But the point is, a dent has been made when you have this disorienting moment, this disorienting dilemma that John was talking about earlier. There you go, John.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Now I want to do I want to do this last one. That's fine. So where are we taking you on this, right? So what's the final cap here? So when we're working with leaders, the thoughtful leader, first level, being a thoughtful leader, what you do is you lead by making a dent while being candid. It's that simple. It's that hard. And so, as you can see, if you reflect on the last hour we've had together, we've led you through starting from leading from the heart by just what the measure of the metric is, candid, leading from love, reverence from life from your heart. And then did you have to apologize? And then we layered it in. And so the reason why we really like these acronyms and the feedback we're getting is that it's simple, it's quick, it's to the point, and it allows the symbology that when leaders are in the heat of the moment, it's very easy to remember, I got to lead by making a dent while being candid, or just candid, or I got to lead. And just whatever in the symbology, the symbolism here of just, seeing lead, this stuff all,
That's Siri. Sorry.
No, that's all right. That's right. But so this is some symbolism, right? And so for you guys, when we're teaching our leaders, when we get to this point now, then we do the exercises about leading and dent and candid, and then we do to reinforce this. But that's pretty much what we found is a lot of senior leaders, a lot of people have been, decades in leadership, very powerful people, that when we take them on the journey, as we've taken you on the journey, and we relate it back to stories of our journey of our past and relate it to what would they do different today as a thoughtful leader as using this system versus how they may have done something previously in the past, and gives them to reflecting. That's where people start going, I'm getting it.
Yep. Well said.
And with that, I think we're at the point of questions.
Yeah, and as you kind of put some questions into the Q&A, I'll mention that I think this audience is all around and from coast to coast, and I'm not even sure, maybe even international. But John and I have been on a bit of a book tour. I typically will do solo events because I can travel more at this point, and we've been doing a lot with bookstores. So we did something with Barnes and Noble. So if you've got a Barnes and Noble in your area and you want us to come to that Barnes and Noble, or actually between all of us here, small boutique bookshops, local bookshops, I love those. I would much prefer to go to some of those. Let them know and let them contact us, and we'll be happy to come to your hometown or wherever you are, and we'll come do a reading there. What's fun, if we can take time to do readings, some of the stories are kind of fun to kind of go through too, with regard to what's a transactional leader, what's a transcendent leader, that sort of stuff. So any questions from the folks?
I'm not seeing any so far come in. So going back to, what I'm thinking here is that, what I've found, what's the hardest part? What's the hardest part of training leaders? And it goes back to what I'm saying is lots of times they know it, right? They know it all. They've seen it all. They've been through it all. And a lot of times they're coming at it from that perspective because they're stuck, or they're so fixed where they're at. And so the challenge then, when that happens, is I try and work with that leader to try and get them to open up, to look inside themselves. And what I find is that that's really what it is if they look inside themselves deeper, if they look inside themselves more honestly, that's where we get some progress, right? That's where they start to see a different perspective about themselves, and they start opening up. And in order to do that, though, it's really hard for some leaders, right? Because they're so galvanized by their past. So, anyways, that's one of the tricks I found, is that if you get somebody that's really stubborn in their ways, it's really the trick there is get them to look inside themselves deeper, or more honestly.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll just close by saying that, there's a reason we put these quotes in the book, because they speak to us as individuals. But um, I'll paraphrase Van Sachs in the book. He says, "You are more than the sum of your parts. You really are." So just because you have a role in an organization, it doesn't mean that's all you are. You can do far more, and you should bring that in. So if you want to bring your heart, you want to bring in some empathy, you want to bring in some, as John was saying, love, as John Chambers was saying, love. It's okay. And I think in this post-pandemic world, it's okay to be you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, folks.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Hope you enjoy the book. Reach out if you have questions. Oh, and when you get the book, at the end, there's a page there with the QR code. You can add your story to our website, to the Lead the Flow website, and add your story there and become part of the community where we share our stories with each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us, John, Ken. It's been a pleasure as always. And thank you to all of you who've spent an hour with us today. I'll be sending out the recording and the PDU code. So thanks again, everyone. Have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, folks. Take care.